there's a real good reason for me to be in Jackson this time, maybe more so than any other, and that's what took place about 40 miles west of here, and that's what I want to talk about tonight at Vicksburg. I mean, this is quite a story, and it's a story that even some people around here don't know, and that's great fun for me. But I need to start out talking about something that I always mention, and whenever I'm doing any event like this, I am quite sure that at least some of you have some interest in the Civil War for one reason, because at some time, many years ago perhaps, you read a book called The Killer Angels. And every time I say that, I see people nod their heads. Now, if you have no idea what The Killer Angels is, have never heard of it, that's okay, it's not required. I'll explain it to you very quickly. The Killer Angels is written by my father, came out in 1974. It is the story of the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, what The Killer Angels is not is the history of the Battle of Gettysburg. It's not a history book. It's the story as told to you from the characters themselves, and not just any characters, but the real people, the people whose decisions made the history, the people whose decisions determined that there would even be a Battle of Gettysburg. And we're talking about people like Robert E. Lee and James Longstreet and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. I mean, these are the people whose decisions made that history. It's the reason we know about Gettysburg today. And my father took you there to that battlefield, put you in their heads, and told you the story the way they would tell it. Nobody had ever done that before. Now, my father was not an academic historian, and in fact, he caught a lot of grief for that book. You know, every university, every major university history department has the Civil War guy. I mean, you know, there's the British guy and the Roman guy and the medieval guy. Well, Florida State University had the Civil War guy. And this guy said to my father, "Who are you to tell us what Robert E. Lee was thinking? The Killer Angels is a book that should never have been written." They were not friends. A year after that, a marvelous thing happened to my father. A telegram comes to his house. Congratulations. The Killer Angels has been awarded the 1975 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. Now, I don't know if he took that telegram over to the history department at Florida State and, you know, whacked the guy in the face. They still weren't friends. But if you think about that, any author who wins a Pulitzer Prize has the right to believe his ship has come in. Anything he wants to do from now on is going to be sought after. There are going to be, you know, publishers fighting over his work. His book will become a bestseller. I mean, this is what happens today. None of that happened to Michael Shaara. Think about 1975, end of the Vietnam War. Nobody in this country wanted to read a book about generals. It was about as unpopular a subject as you can imagine. And I mean, my father was a master of bad timing. And a crushing blow to him was that the Killer Angels sort of faded away. Now, unless you were in the military, and I've talked to some people today that were command and staff at Leavenworth, if you were in the West Point or any of the other military academies, it was required reading. If you were a military officer, or if you're a Civil War buff in the 70s, and there were some, I mean, you might have picked up the Killer Angels, otherwise you never heard of it. The book just sort of faded away until 1993, and in 1993 the movie Gettysburg came out, which is based on the Killer Angels. Ted Turner's great risk, he risked millions of dollars to put that book on the screen, and for the first time, The Killer Angels, on the strength of the film, became a New York Times bestseller 19 years after it was published. And for 4 weeks, it was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Again, 19 years later and 5 years after my father's death. He did not live to see that. Well, Turner's people came to me and said, "Ted wants to make more movies. Wouldn't it be great to take your father's book, which just covers 4 days, take your father's book and go both directions, before and after, follow a lot of the same characters, and tell the story the same way." It was always about being a movie. I had never written anything before, and that's not false modesty. I had never written anything before. I was a businessman in Tampa, and I thought about it and thought, okay, maybe this is something I'd like to try to do. And I started working on the prequel, going before Gettysburg, back to the beginning of the war. And the characters, some of the same characters my father used, but then some different people like Stonewall Jackson, fabulous character, and really had fun with that, and started putting this together that someone else would adapt for a screenplay. It was always about being a movie. Because people ask me, how'd you know how to write a book? I mean, weren't you scared? Well, no, because there were no expectations. And the idea is I'll put this story together using my father's kind of research, the original material. Go back, hear the voices, diaries, memoirs, collections of letters, all the stuff from people who were there. That's the key. And I remembered that from my father's writing, and I knew, okay, if I'm going to do this, I need to do that kind of research. But we talked about the fact that if whatever I come up with is lousy, it goes in the trash. I mean, nobody will ever know. So there was no risk. There were no expectations. And I'm representing my father's estate in New York City, Random House, who has now this #1 bestseller in The Killer Angels. So they take my phone calls. And I'm talking to them about what I'm doing. I say, yes, I'm writing the prequel to The Killer Angels. It's called Gods and Generals. And they said, well, you ought to send us the manuscript. Let's take a look at it. Okay. I sent them the manuscript. The phone call I got was, we don't care if it's a movie. We like the book. We think you're a writer. Here's a contract. That changed my whole life. And that's not exaggeration. That changed my whole life. Now, 13 books later, yeah, it definitely has changed my whole life. The point of those stories and the magic of The Killer Angels, what my father did is he was able to take you with him back to a time where you could see the story in a way you'd never seen it before. You don't get that from a modern biography, a modern history book. That's not what historians do. Historians tell you the facts and figures. They tell you, that they get the story straight, hopefully, if they're good historians. But my father did it very differently, and what I began to hear when I was talking about those books, and then I began to go to different sources, back to the Mexican War. It amazed me how many people didn't know there was a Mexican War in 1846. We fought Mexico. The key to the Mexican War is who took part. All these generals from the 1860s, they were all young lieutenants in 1846, right out of West Point, some of them clueless about being a soldier. That's a good story. Going back to the American Revolution, again, the American Revolution. There's John and Abigail Adams and Benjamin Franklin and George Washington, and you learn all that in school. But do you really know the story? And that's what I had fun, and that's when I really sort of hit the ground running with this and really began to enjoy getting into the heads of these characters, and you know who they are. But do you really know what it was like for Benjamin Franklin when he literally seduces King Louis XVI into coming into the war on our side and saving us? The British were winning. The British were they were the finest army and navy in the world. They were defeating us until the French came in and joined us. The French bailed us out and enabled us to win the American Revolution. That's a story most people really don't know. And of course, we returned the favor a few times to the French after that, which is a story more of us do know. But the point is, when I began to hear from audiences, when people say to me, I didn't know that, that's fun. And when I got to, I'm thinking, okay, what story don't you know? How about World War I? If most Americans get their history from Hollywood, which is a sad statement to make, but if you think about World War II versus World War I think how many movies, they're making them today. I mean, how many movies have been made about World War II? Hundreds and hundreds. And I can count on one hand the good movies made about World War I. Paths of Glory, All Quiet on the Western Front, Sergeant York, the original Gallipoli. I mean, that's about it. Most people just don't know about the Lafayette Escadrille or the Red Baron. The Red Baron, by the way, is not just a cartoon character, as someone wondered. No, he has a name, Manfred von Richthofen. He's a marvelous character, and he's the German voice in that story. The Marines at Belleau Wood. Maybe you've heard of Belleau Wood, but I bet you don't know the story. And what the Marines accomplished, they saved Paris. They were responsible for the Germans not winning the war by capturing Paris. That's how close it was. Blackjack Pershing, that's a name you know. So I think you get the point. If I can find these characters, if I can find a story you don't know,